The wealthiest Jewish families in history did not become wealthy because they were smarter than everyone else. They were not. They did not become wealthy because they had better opportunities than everyone else. Many of them built generational fortunes from positions of profound disadvantage, stateless, restricted, excluded from land ownership, from guilds, from the institutions through which most people in their era accumulated wealth. What they had was not advantage. What they had was a mourning. A specific, structured, intentional mourning, practiced before the rest of the household woke, before the noise of the day entered, before the financial pressures and social demands of the world outside the door had any access to the consciousness of the person inside. And I am going to tell you exactly what that mourning contained. Not in vague spiritual terms, not as inspiration, with the precision of someone who has spent 32 years inside the primary texts of Jewish wisdom and who has studied the documented biographical patterns of the families and scholars and merchants whose financial lives became legendary within the tradition. What I am going to share is not a morning routine in the way that term is used today. 10 habits, cold plunge, journaling, green juice. This is older than that, more precise than that. And when you understand not just what these 3 practices are, but why they work, the exact mechanism by which each one operates on your financial reality, you will understand why the families who kept them quietly, consistently, before the world woke up, were the ones whose names appeared again and again in the historical record as the builders, the sustainers, the ones whose prosperity held across generations, while others rose and fell around them. If you are the kind of person who hears something ancient and immediately reaches for a reason it cannot apply to your life today, this teaching is not going to reach you. But if you are the kind of person who is willing to follow the logic all the way to its conclusion before deciding what you think, stay with me. Because what I am about to share will reframe not just your mornings, but your understanding of what mornings are for. Before we go further, I want you to type the phrase, "before the world wakes," in the comments right now. It is not a small thing to declare that you are willing to rise before the noise, that you are willing to claim the first moments of the day before they are taken from you. Type it now. Make that declaration before we continue. The families I am speaking of were not mythological. They were documented. The Rothschilds, whose financial network across 5 countries became the most powerful private banking operation in 19th century Europe, were known within their own community not primarily for their business acumen, though that was formidable, but for their rigorous adherence to the structure of Jewish daily practice, which begins in the moments before full waking. Meyer Amschel Rothschild, the patriarch of that dynasty, who began as a dealer in rare coins in a ghetto in Frankfurt, where Jews were legally confined to a single street and forbidden from most forms of commerce, was documented by his own descendants and by the scholars who later studied his life as a man of extraordinary mourning discipline. Not the discipline of the entrepreneur, the discipline of the scholar and the practitioner. The mourning practices he observed were not innovations he invented. They were inheritances. They were the same practices that had GDK transmitted through the Jewish world for centuries, practiced in far humbler circumstances by far less prosperous men, because they were understood not as success habits, but as obligations of consciousness, as the precise protocol by which a person re-entered the waking world each day as a prepared vessel rather than an unprepared one. I want you to hold that phrase, prepared vessel, because it is the key to everything I am going to share. The ancient teachers understood that the human being who wakes in the morning is not automatically ready to engage with the world in a way that predicate partial departure. The consciousness retreats, the body rests, and what redike in the morning is something that must be actively, deliberately reoriented. A vessel that must be re-prepared. An instrument that must be retuned. The 3 practices I am going to teach you are, in precise functional terms, the retuning protocol. They are what the families who sustained prosperity across generations did before they opened a ledger, before they wrote a letter, before they spoke to a business partner or made a single financial decision. They prepared the instrument first, and then the instrument produced different music than the instruments around it. Here is the first practice. It is called Netilat Yadayim, the ritual washing of the hands. And before you categorize this as purely religious custom and move past it, I want you to stay with me for 60 seconds and follow the functional logic, because the functional logic is precise, and it is the reason this practice belongs at the beginning of a teaching about financial consciousness. The hands in the ancient wisdom framework are the primary instruments of action in the physical world. They are how intention becomes deed, how thought becomes result, how the internal landscape of a person makes contact with the external world and changes it. The Kabbalistic teaching on the hands is that during sleep, the hands come into contact with energetic impurity, not in a superstitious sense, but in a precise spiritual mechanical sense. The consciousness that protects and directs the hands during waking hours is withdrawn during sleep. And so the first act of the morning, before touching the face, before opening a book, before handling anything of significance, is to wash the hands 3 times, alternating, right then left, then right, then left, then right, then left, with full conscious intention. The specific act of pouring water over the hands in this alternating pattern is not arbitrary. The right hand represents the attribute of chesed, of loving expansion, of giving, of the energy that opens and flows outward. The left hand represents gevura, discernment, boundary, the energy that contracts and focuses. Prosperity in the Kabbalistic framework requires both. It requires the expansive energy that reaches, that gives, that moves outward into opportunity, and the discerning energy that evaluates, protects, and holds. The morning washing activates both, alternating between them, beginning with the right, with expansion, because the teaching is that a day begun in the energy of giving, of reaching outward, of chesed, is a day whose financial encounters are oriented toward flow rather than grasping. The families who practiced this understood it not as hygiene and not as religion in the narrow sense, but as the daily recalibration of their primary instruments of action. They were, in functional terms, resetting their hands to their intended operating state before those hands touched anything that mattered. Do this practice tomorrow morning before you touch your phone, before you open your laptop, before you handle money or cards or anything connected to your financial life. Pour water over your hands, alternating right and left 3 times each, and bring your full conscious attention to what you are doing. You are not washing. You are reorienting the instruments of your action toward the energy of purposeful, directed, discerning abundance. The second practice. This one is less known outside the tradition and more immediately confrontational to the modern mind, which is precisely why it produces such significant results when it is genuinely applied. It is called Modeh Ani, the prayer of gratitude spoken in the first moments of waking, before the feet touch the floor, before the body is fully upright, before a single thought about the day ahead has been entertained. The full text is brief, 14 words in Hebrew, and what it says, translated precisely, is this: I offer gratitude before you, living and eternal King, for you have returned my soul to me with compassion. Great is your faithfulness. 14 words, spoken lying down or sitting at the edge of the bed before anything else. Now I want to address what the modern mind immediately does with this, because I have seen it happen hundreds of times in my years of teaching. The modern mind hears gratitude practice and files it immediately next to journaling and mindfulness apps and the 10 things you are grateful for that you write in a notebook. And that filing is this, a nice idea that some people find helpful. And the moment that filing happens, the practice loses 90% of its potency. Because Modeh Ani is not a nice idea. It is a precise energetic intervention performed at the most critical moment of the entire day, the moment of re-entry into consciousness. The moment when the brain is transitioning out of the theta state of sleep into the alpha and beta states of waking awareness. Neuroscience now confirms what the ancient teachers knew experientially. The first content that enters consciousness during this transition window sets the orienting framework for the hours that follow. It literally primes the reticular activating system, the brain's filtering mechanism, for what to notice, what to attend to, what to flag as significant. A person who re-enters consciousness with the first thought being a financial anxiety, what is owed, what is late, what is not enough, has primed their primary filtering system to notice scarcity throughout the day. Every piece of evidence that confirms the anxiety will be flagged. Every opportunity that contradicts it will be filtered out. This is not metaphor. This is the documented function of the RAS. The person who re-enters consciousness with Modeh Ani, with a 14-word declaration of gratitude for the return of their own life force, for the faithfulness of provision, has primed their filtering system for a completely different category of signal. They will notice different things throughout the day. They will flag different opportunities. They will enter conversations and negotiations from a different neurological baseline. The wealthiest Jewish families in the historical record were not optimists in the naive sense. They were realists who had built, through this practice performed every single morning before the world woke up, a nervous system that was oriented toward noticing what was arriving rather than cataloging what was absent. That orientation, sustained across years and across generations, produces a measurably different financial life. Not because of magic, because of mechanism. Now I want to address something directly, because this is the place in the teaching where I sometimes see people begin to mentally step back. They think, but I am in real financial difficulty. I have real bills, real debt, real scarcity. And you are asking me to begin my morning with gratitude. How is that not simply denial? How is that not simply pretending the problem is not there? And I want to answer that directly, with full respect for the weight of what real financial difficulty feels like. Modeh Ani does not ask you to pretend the problem is not there. It asks you to acknowledge something that is also true, simultaneously, that you are alive, that your consciousness was returned to you this morning, that the basic provision of another day has been given. Not the financial problem is solved, not everything is fine. Merely, I am here, I have this day, I have the instrument of my own life. That acknowledgement is not denial, it is precision. It is the refusal to allow the financial difficulty to be the totalizing fact, the fact that erases all other facts. And that refusal, performed in 14 words before the feet touch the floor, is the second retuning of the morning. The hands were retuned first. Now the mind is retuned. And a person who enters the day with retuned hands and a retuned mind is already a fundamentally different participant in the financial reality of that day than the person who woke beside them and reached immediately for their phone. The third practice. This is the one that the historical record is most consistent about, and the one that the modern world has the most difficulty with. Not because it is complex, but because it requires something that the modern world treats as a luxury rather than a discipline. It is called kavah, fixedness, regularity, the deliberate creation of an unmovable appointment. Specifically, the morning study of Torah or Talmud, a period of engagement with the primary texts of the tradition before the commercial or professional day begins. Among the Jewish merchant families of the medieval and early modern periods, the ones whose financial networks spanned cities and whose commercial correspondence formed some of the most fascinating primary source material in economic history, this practice was near universal. They rose before the household. They studied. Not because the study would directly produce a business insight that morning, though it sometimes did. They studied because the act of engaging the trained mind with a complex, demanding, morally serious text before engaging it with the demands of commerce established a hierarchy. It declared, in the most concrete possible way, what came first. What the mind was for before it was for profit. What the standard of thinking was before it was applied to a ledger or a negotiation. And this hierarchy, wisdom before commerce, principle before profit, the life of the mind before the life of the market, was not a handicap. It was the precise condition that produced the quality of judgment, the depth of ethical reasoning, and the long-term orientation that distinguished the families whose prosperity held from the families whose prosperity burned bright and collapsed. You do not have to study Talmud. I want to be clear about that. The principle is not confined to a specific text. The principle is the practice of engaging, every morning before the world wakes, with something that demands your highest thinking and your deepest values. Something that is not about today's transactions. Something that asks more of your mind than your inbox asks of it. Something that reminds you, at the beginning of every single day, of the kind of person you are trying to be and the quality of thinking you are trying to bring to your life. Because the person who enters their financial day having already exercised their judgment on something demanding and serious is not the same person as the one who enters it cold, reactive, already behind. The mind that has been stretched before the market opens is a more capable, more discerning, more resilient mind. And discernment, the ability to see clearly, to evaluate precisely, to distinguish the genuine opportunity from the attractive distraction, is the single most valuable financial instrument any person possesses. Here is what I want you to hear as the complete picture of these three practices together, because the power is not in any one of them alone. It is in the sequence, in the totality, in the fact that all three are performed before the world has made a single demand on you. First, the hands, the instruments of action, are reoriented toward purposeful, discerning abundance. Second, the mind, the filtering instrument, is reoriented toward what is arriving rather than what is absent. Third, the judgment, the decision-making faculty, is sharpened on something that demands its best before it is given to the world. A person who does all three every morning before the noise begins, before the phone is checked, before the first anxiety of the day has a chance to establish itself as the dominant frequency, that person is not operating on the same morning as the people around them. They are operating on a different version of the morning, a prepared one, a tuned one, a morning that belongs to them rather than to the demands of everyone else. And that difference, accumulated across days and weeks and months and years, is what the historical record shows, again and again, as the condition that preceded sustained, generational financial transformation. I want to be honest with you about something as we come toward the end of this teaching. When I first began sharing these practices with people outside the traditional community, people who came to me not because they were observant or because they were looking for religious instruction, but because they were looking for something they could not find in the financial world, the response was often this: "It seems too simple. 14 words, hand washing, daily study. Surely prosperity requires something more sophisticated than this." And my answer has been the same for 32 years. The simplicity is the point. The genius of these practices is not in their complexity. It is in their dailiness. It is in the fact that they cannot be done once and set aside. They must be done every morning, every single morning before the world wakes. And the discipline of returning to them, the commitment of doing them when you feel like it and when you do not, when the morning is full of light and when it is full of dread, is itself the training. Not the training for some future moment when you will be ready for prosperity. The training is the prosperity. The person who can be disciplined about 14 words and water and 30 minutes of serious thought before the day begins is the person who can be disciplined about a budget, about a commitment to a partner, about the long, difficult months before a business finds its footing. Discipline in the small thing is the rehearsal for discipline in the large thing. And the ancient teachers knew this with a precision that modern productivity culture is still fumbling toward. I have a complete resource for you, a full framework that takes these 3 practices and builds them into a structured morning protocol with the specific timings, the precise instructions for each practice, and the additional layers of the tradition that extend this teaching from the morning into the full rhythm of the day and the week. It is in the description below this video, and if today's teaching lit something in you, I want you to go there. Everything you need to build the morning that the families I have described built is there, assembled with the care and precision this teaching deserves. Now I want to ask you something specific. Of these 3 practices, the washing, the gratitude, the study, which one is furthest from your current morning? Tell me in the comments. Be honest, not as an admission of failure, but as the beginning of a plan. Because the gap you name today is the gap you can begin closing tomorrow morning. Tell me which one, and tell me what one concrete step you will take in the next 48 hours to bring it into your morning. I will read every response. I respond personally. Your commitment here is not performative. It is the first act of the morning you are building. If this channel has been giving you the kind of teaching that makes you think differently, not just feel differently, but actually re-examine what you understood about how prosperity works and what produces it. Subscribe now so you do not miss what comes next. Every new subscriber tells me that this work is reaching people who are genuinely ready for it. And this community is, without question, the most serious and committed audience I have had the privilege of teaching. And if today gave you something real, something that will be in your mind when you wake up tomorrow morning, please press the like button, not as a gesture toward me, as a signal to the platform that this teaching deserves to reach further, because there is someone who will wake up tomorrow the same way they woke up today, reaching for their phone before their feet touch the floor, handing the first and most powerful moments of their consciousness to the noise of everyone else's demands, and who needs to find this teaching before another morning is spent unprepared. Your press of that button is how they find it. May your mornings become sacred. May the time before the world wakes be yours, fully, deliberately, intentionally yours. May the washing of your hands remind you each day that you are an instrument of purposeful action. May the first words from your lips be words of arrival and gratitude. May the first work of your mind be work worthy of your mind's full capacity. And may the day that follows such a morning reflect the preparation you brought to it, in clarity, in discernment, in the quiet, accumulating, unshakable prosperity of a life that knows what it is doing before the world asks anything of it. Shalom.